to talk about this subject, the spiral dynamics. I call it a set of values that we can use for a sustainable development. And I'm going to start with a series of images to invite you also to join the conversation. So I'm going to start with a few years ago, just a few. So a few years ago, we were hunters and gatherers. And it was a right to kill animals, because we needed to survive at that moment. We needed to survive the winter. We needed to feed our children. We needed to feed our community. So it was okay to hunt animals and to kill them. A few years later, it was a right also to kill humans in order to praise the gods and to ask for favors from them. So we were doing these human sacrifices. We don't understand exactly why we were making them, but we know that maybe some people were making them around here. Then later on, we had these epic wars, the medieval times. And as a spoils of wars, you were earning the right to have your slaves, to rape the women, and it was a right. It was socially accepted. That's what you can get after winning a war. Also a few years later, we had this idea that the only way to have a political succession is to kill the king. So the one who kills the king is going to be the next king. So these were more or less socially accepted values during certain time. After this time, we started to think, well, maybe we weren't right about those things. Maybe things should be considered different. And we started to think different in some other ways. Maybe we need to give some rights to the people that hasn't been having rights, or we need to fight for equality. We need to consider that the other ones are equals as us, and even though they look different. And nowadays we start to have these conversations. What is better, to be vegan, to be a meat eater? And how do we decide it? How do we say this is better than that? And then we have these problems. The wall between Mexico and the States. Is it okay to build a wall? Is it okay to climb the wall? Should we be allowed to cross the wall? Should humans just be allowed to pass from one side to the other one? Or it's a right to separate families, to divide the children from their parents? I didn't do it today. We have more recently these fights. Who do we support? The last government? The new government? Do we go for the Russians? Do we go for the Americans? And how do we decide those things? Of course, we have political means to decide these things, to say like, maybe this is better than that, and we've been building some framework to decide about those things. But what is the core value behind this decision? A few months ago, the new government of Mexico was asking us whether if they should build a train in Yucatan. And this train will be crossing through the jungle. And that means that there will be deforestation and maybe some animals will be in danger, even though there are some plans. But how do we make that decision? The government was asking us citizens, and we citizens have the powers to decide. That's democracy, the power of the people. But how do we decide? Where do we get our values, that knowledge? We know that we reject violence. We are not medievals. We are not hunters and gatherers anymore. So we reject the violence. That we support the diplomatic way. People should talk about the things. People should defend their point of view and talk about it. We care about the environment. We know that we shouldn't damage it anymore. We care about the animals. And we like to protect our children. They are the future, so we know that it's gold. We need to protect them. But how do we keep on defining the values for a sustainable future? We're talking about sustainability for all in this series of conferences. So where does it come from? Where does it go? How has it been in the past? How are we going to be able to find the means to confront the infamous wicked problems? Those problems that governments doesn't know how to cope with, that we have in our society, that we see in the news, and we don't have strategies to deal with them. So how do we give the designers, the people that will be working with these strategies, the ones that are going to have these challenges in the classes, instead of building a chair, now find a way to end the hunger, the world hunger, or instead of designing just a beautiful vase in ceramic, now you have to find a way to not divide the families in the migration system. So how do we give these weapons to the students, aside with an Hippocratic oath for designers and innovators? We have every now and then some ideas of like what should be ethics for designers. How do we give them some core values, some ideas? But we haven't been giving it so much of a thought. And maybe we should also end up like doctors, and at the end to swear that we're not going to damage the environment, that we're going to protect the children, that we're going to reject violence, that we're not going to be corrupt. We are in the 100th year of the Bauhaus, the anniversary of the Bauhaus. And the Bauhaus started with Johannes Itten directing it. And he was saying these kind of things, that designers needs to know about themselves. They need to have self-control, self-knowledge, and they need to cope with the reality around them. Because they are not just only themselves, they are also the reality that surrounds them. They need to be aware of the interest of the people and their requirements. And this is how I come to the idea of spiral dynamics. Spiral dynamics is a theory of Ken Wilber. It's just a theory. It's not a law. It's not something that is demonstrated. Ken Wilber is a psychologist. And he's trying to analyze the idea of how our values has been transforming through the history and where are they going through. So it's a map of human complexity, our complex values that we change from one epoch to the next one. It's an evolution of those values, and he maps them in 8 levels. These values, these beliefs, and this psychology is behind all of our choices. So this is what we are having as a background to make the choices of our everyday, to judge the news, to say our comments in our social networks. So which will be the core values that we're going to give to the students when they need to confront wicked problems? Just to talk very briefly about them, this is the illustration of a spiral dynamic. It's made by Don Beck, but it's based on the work of Ken Wilber. And the idea is that it's a spiral, upward spiral, that is going from one end to the next one, from one tire to the next one. And the thing that is giving the change is this idea of going from the individual to the collective, from the rebel to the institutions, from one person that is opposing the idea of the many, and then the many trying to adapt that ideology. It's also a fight from the right brain and the left brain, from the mathematical self to the creative self. And in that way, in that dance, is going upwards. It starts in the same way that I was starting the conference today. With many years ago, we were hunters and gatherers. Then we started to make these institutions, these religions, these tribes, these societies that will support us, and won't leave us alone to deal with the environment. Then we had the rebels, the heroes of war, that were telling us where to go, and were creating a little bit of a chaos, but we're also breaking or expanding the ideas of those old institutions. Then we needed to control these rebels, so we invented other institutions. We invented the governments, the police, the capitalism, and many systems that will ask you to be in this, just in this system, not to go out, because you need to save for your retirement, or you need to comply with the social order. And then we started to have this orange meme, that is the scientists, the new thinkers, the thinkerers, the makers, that were starting to change the ideas. How do we, or somebody that believed that the earth wasn't flat, that the earth was round, and he needed to defend his idea. After that, we had a more conscious society, a more conscious institution, that is the green meme. And this is illustrated by the hippies, by those people that were trying to find a new way to live in community. So it was gathering the ideas of all behind. And until this meme, we are trying to evolve all those values that has been coming before into a more social value, more gathering the ideas, and not just to fight between one side and the other one, but to start to integrate it. And this is how do we come to the second tier of the memes, the yellow meme and the blue and the turquoise meme, that are trying to integrate us, first as individuals and then as a collective. So this will be more or less the idea. The first memes, that is our history, our past, the way that we've been through all the history of humankind, and the values that we are starting to propose, the idea of where are we going through. We're not only individuals in this collective self of the humankind. We are a collective, we're social animals, and we're not just defined by our personality or my own decisions. We are defined by our situation. Ortega y Gasset, the Spanish philosopher, was saying it in the Revolt of the Masses, that we're not just ourselves, we're our situation. And the Spaniards, for instance, they needed to be themselves in the civil war with that situation. So they were defined by the situation that they were living. Nowadays we have a different situation. We're becoming something else. We're having other values, and we need to be agreeing on those values. What are the things that we're valuing the most? That's why we are talking about values for the world, an objective for 2030. Where are we going to with these values? We're writing books, essays, to say like, if we value this, then we need to live in this other thing. Then we need to make choices between one thing and the other one. And I'm trying to gather all these ideas into the idea of integral practices. How do we integrate all these values, all this experience of humankind, all these ideas of where are we going through, what is going to be the future? How do we, designers, cultural agents, utopian dreamers, how do we agree on the future that, as members of the human race, we would like to build? And I think the right place to start is academia, is a university, is where we can start to experiment with these strategies. And I feel that our courses can become this playbook for strategies of development. When instead of asking the student to make a chair, we ask them to practice how do we end up the human hunger? How do we raise up the kids? How do we create a different system, alternative to capitalism? Nobody's imagining it. What is it going to be the alternative to capitalism? And in this work, I've been trying to gather a set of weapons. So these are more or less some collection of those weapons that are used in my courses with the students. And I was very pleased to see that some of those students were presenting their work over here. And they are trying to make proposals for communities. This was a proposal for one of the poorest neighbors in Mexico City and the most dangerous, the Hank Gonzalez borough. And it was a proposal for a high school, for how to improve the conditions of the high school. This other proposal, we were hearing it yesterday. Some students were trying to do a different strategy for a sustainable community, some permaculturists living in Yucatan, and how to improve their business, their ideas, the things that they can offer to the society. We can see the Melipona bee over there. So just to wrap it up, this is the idea of sustainability for all, that we start to believe that our students are not just those millennials that doesn't listen to us, that the students are the next evolution of this tire, the people that will integrate the knowledge that we're having, that we're giving to them, and they will bring us sustainability for all. So our responsibility as educators, as people that is proposing knowledge to them, is to make that learning on sustainability addictive, that they need to know more, that they want to know more, they want to research in YouTube, they want to find in Google, they want to ask us more things, that we start to forecast the failure, like they say in Facebook, fail fast, fail better, that we open doors in the classroom for failure, for mistakes, for learn about that we prototype resilience. That means that not only in the workshops with wood, with metal, with plastic, but to work with people. Our laboratory, our next workshop is with people. How do we prototype their resilience? And to end up with this idea of a more open and inclusive design. Like Enzo Mari says, design when everybody designs. How do we open the process to everybody so that we can all join this idea of an integral community? So that's it. It's a collection of ideas that is developing, that it's going to go deeper in this paper. So I invite you to read it. And it's an ongoing work that luckily it's been having nice results with the students. And I've been very honored to work with many students that are doing this process. Thanks a lot. If there is any question, I'm open over here.
Muchas gracias. ¿Alguien tiene alguna pregunta o comentario que quiera hacerle al maestro Dávila? No. Ok, muchas gracias. Gracias.